such peace. And at the same moment, the ravages of cancer or extreme heart conditions or whatever, Hodgkin's disease. I was working with a boy who just died 2 weeks ago. And I would come in each time, and he would be agitated and irritated, and he had bed sores, and there was a lot of pain and suffering. And I'd wash him and help change him and just be with him. But at the same moment, I was just being quiet inside my own being. In other words, I wasn't coming on to him. I wasn't saying, you ought to go deeper in yourself. I wasn't hustling him. I was merely working on myself in his presence. The result of that was that very slowly he started to let go of identifying with the body, identifying with the pain, the psychological part, and started to experience just a spaciousness in which he could see death. Death comes, birth comes, life comes, growth comes. For you to be of any use to someone that is dying, for me to be of any use, there is one simple rule. You work on yourself. You don't work on the other person. We have a model that is so deeply ingrained in us often as professionals. You're healing someone else. You're doing for the old people. You're doing for the young people. You're doing for the dying people. I have a very simple rule in my life: work on myself. Because all I can offer to you or to a dying person or to a marital problem or to some child, I can only offer my being, and my being is the result of everything I've done in my life to get to where I am. That's all I have to offer. But if you can flip through those channels, that love is not conditional love. It's not based on individual differences. It's merely the love because you are seeing the divine plan made manifest again. Every moment of your life, once you understand the purpose of it, is your vehicle for awakening. This moment is your vehicle for awakening. If you're uncomfortable at this moment, okay, you're uncomfortable. Allow it. If you're fascinated, be fascinated. Allow it. Give it space. Give it space. Imagine a picture, and the picture is a picture of a cloud. And if the cloud fills the whole picture frame, all you see is the cloud, and you're totally immersed in the cloud. But allow a little teeny bit of blue sky around the edge of the cloud, and then imagine identifying with the blue sky instead of the cloud. From that point, you can say, cloud. The difference between I'm depressed or I'm depressed versus, wow, am I depressed? Or I'm depressed versus, look at that depression. Whew. Boy, I don't think I'll ever get through that one. Wow, that's a heavy one. Boy, that's the worst depression I've ever seen. I don't think people live through those kind. Now, the second kind I'm doing is showing the ability to keep a sense of humor in the middle of the depression. Well, if you've got a sense of humor, how depressed could you be? See? But that's the issue. It's the issue of the tiny bit of spaciousness that surrounds the identity with the happenings of life, the experiences of life. It is said in the spirit mystic literature, one to me is loss and gain. One to me is fame and shame. One to me is pleasure and pain. Meaning, there's fame. Hello, Ram Das. That's fame. Ram who? Das, did you say? Don Das, yes. Right. Oh, you're that horrible guy that was, that's shame. Oh, you just won the lottery? That's gain. Wallet just stolen? Loss. Oh. Pleasure. Oh, my darling, come here. Oh, my leg hurts. In each one, they take you completely, get lost in it. I'm somebody who has a hurt leg. Versus here I am, and there's a leg that hurts. The predicament is that most of us don't want this kind of consciousness because we don't want to lose the rushes or the trips of life. We don't want to forego the romanticism. We don't want to forego the rush that comes from identifying with our own melodrama. And that kind of equanimity, that kind of quietness, that kind of spaciousness, that kind of presence, that kind of compassion for oneself and for all things, because from a quiet, clear place you see how it all is without pushing or pulling. For it is only the non-attached mind that can truly appreciate how it is. Otherwise, you're just seeing the projections of your own desires. If you're hungry and you go down the street, you will notice restaurants. If your car is making a strange knock, you will notice gas stations. And that is what your universe is full of. Because you and I are living in entirely different universes, because each individual is living in a universe selecting from the possible infinity of things, those things which lock in with your own desire system. So if you identify with a desire, that will determine what you see in the world. When you get to the point that you can allow a desire system without identifying with it, sure, I have lust. Sure, I have greed. Sure, I have fear. Sure, I have depression. But here I am. I am. I am, and there's an aging body, and I am, and there's depression, and I am, and there's hope, and I am, and there's planning, and I am, and there's death. How different the space. That's because the television channels, you're living on more than one of them simultaneously. You're starting to live on all of them all at once. There are some very heavy processes that occur at the time of death. And the Tibetan Buddhists, for example, understood that the meaning of life was the preparation for death. You were preparing to stay conscious through these incredibly heavy processes that happen. Heavy process, example. A fellow called me the other day, his mother just died. He's a meditator, he's a Buddhist. He sat with her through the process. He said at first she protested, then she acquiesced. He said then it got to the point where she was too weak to eat, so I had to feed her. Then it got to the point where she lost her sphincter control and her bowel control, and I found myself carrying her to the toilet with her feces dripping down my leg. And that was a hard one for us. And then it got to the point where all of her unconscious processes started to rise to the surface, and I found in the middle of the night sometimes she would be calling to me, and I'd go over and she'd start to make love to me. And all of the Oedipal stuff was coming up. And he said, and through it all, we still kept the thread. We still kept the thread of consciousness with one another. It's not the physical death that's so scary, it's the psychological death. It's the ceasing to be who you think you are. The thread was held. And I have been now with many people and just holding them as they die. And being right with them, looking in their eyes as the spirit just leaves, as they just leave, and the last breath occurs and the eyes glaze over and the being just leaves. And there's just a release, an opening. Because by the time they got to that moment, they were no longer clinging to that which dies. Don't be silly, where could I go? There's no more clinging to that which dies. For who we are was, is, and will be. And these are just processes of transformation that we're going through. Just like it's very hard for a prepubescent to understand the time will come when his baseball cards aren't that relevant. So the time will come when even our mortal coil isn't that relevant. If you will just imagine somebody who has died, and they died in the Western, I'll give you two people. One has died in the Western metaphor, see, so they're busy not dying. Doctor, save me, transplant me, implant me, do whatever you do, but don't let me die. But you're dead, then you die. And a voice says to you, hello. And you say, well, if I can hear a voice saying hello, I guess I didn't die. The voice says, no, you died. You say, well, I can't have died. And that's confusion. It's called purgatory in Christianity. And you just sort of hang in that place, and then you get reprogrammed into the next round. But now, as you go through incarnation after incarnation, on and on and on and on, somewhere along in the sequence of these, you begin to awaken just a little bit. And you get to the point where you begin to hear what I'm talking about, and you begin to see, wow, far out, that's all that happens when you die. So as you're dying this time, instead of, doctor, doctor, you say, wow, this is going to be great. Here we go. Ready? Ready? Put on your safety belt. Here I go. Ready or not? Oh, wow. Whew. Now you're dead, see. Somebody says hello, and you say hi. Now you're in a new predicament. You're still somebody. You're not nobody yet. You haven't finished your rounds of birth and death. So you're going to take another incarnation because you've got more stuff to do. You've got to go through more experiences. So you have a list of things you've got to go through, see. You say, gee, if I did it right, I could clean up all of these in one birth. Far out. Let's see. If I took birth as a child in the poorest tribe in Africa, that would be good, because I'd clean up that one. That was the one I got from being that king 50 births ago when I misused that. Then let's see, if I get raped when I'm 9, that'll be beautiful. That would take care of that one, see. And then, see, I'll get syphilis at 13. I could die at 17 and clean the whole thing up. Far out. Okay. So now you've got a problem. You're all ready to do this. You've got your plan, and you put a little sign on you saying, this is all just a scenario. This isn't reality. You put a little sign on it, and the sign says, I am somebody who wants to take this birth looking for 2 other people who need me, karmically like I need them, And the computers whir and all kinds of things happen, and within 1 million or 2 Earth years, something comes up. Doesn't matter, it's going on anyway. And there's a moment of passion, and there you are. And as you're being born, you say to everybody, well, see you later. And you dive into Earth, and you go, wah, wah, and you're a baby. Veil over. You were a baby, that's all your reality is, a baby. 9 years old, you're raped, 13, syphilis, 17, you die. No, I don't want to die, you're dead. You come up and you say, hi, back so soon, right. Well, that cleaned up all those 5 now. Is that too gross for you? From where I'm sitting, I've got to up-level it just one bit by just saying to you that the reality that lies behind all these relative realities, there is no time. All your reincarnations are happening simultaneously. That's a little heavy for you, but you got to understand that it's not like it's spread out like Bridie Murphy, like you were that 40 years ago. It's all here now, all your incarnations. So that when you get all done with the last one, you realize nothing happened anyway. I mean, I'm pushing your mind all over the place. If you could see the universe that way, what would be the difference in the meaning of death? Well, I'm finishing chapter 3. Now, I'm not saying that you should have a mind intellectual overlay that makes everything different that way, not a dishonest imposition of intellect. But for anybody that will subject themselves to simply sitting down quietly and learning how to quiet their mind by allowing the thoughts to come and go, just as simple a thing as following your breath. Just take 2 minutes now. Bring your awareness to your breath. Just notice the breath. Either notice it going in and out of your nose, or notice it rising and falling in the middle of your abdomen. Pick one or the other and stay with it. Notice the breath going in. Notice the breath going out. And notice the little transition points between the in-breath and the out-breath, and the out-breath and the in-breath. Keep your awareness focused on your breath. Let the rest of the thoughts come and go, just like tiny little insects around a light. If you notice feelings in your body, notice them, and then let them go. If you are thinking about what this is all about, notice that thought, let it go. Come back to your breath. Breathing in, breathing out. Thinking about the future, remembering the past. Thoughts coming, going. Bring your awareness back to your breath. Deeper, quieter. Follow the breath carefully. Follow the in-breath, the moment of turning, the out-breath, the moment of turning. The silence in the room, notice it, let it go. Come back to the breath. The breath is the focal point. It's the primary object. The rest of the universe comes and it goes. Problems come into mind. Notice them. Bring your awareness back to your breath. Staying right in this place now. Don't move yet. That is the first method that you use in order to begin to be aware of who you are. You can do it anywhere. anytime. You don't need beads, you don't need priests, you don't need ashrams, you just need your breath. Because while you are following your breath, which is the doorway between form and formless, because between the in-breath and the out-breath, and the out-breath and the in-breath, there is the space. Now let me give you one more exercise to find the whole other quality. Focus in the middle of your chest, just as if you had two nostrils, and breathe. Now, as if you were breathing in and out of the middle of your chest, let your nose or your mouth breathe in or out the oxygen. But imagine that your chest is simultaneously breathing in a very soft, very delicate mist. Breathe in, breathe out. When you breathe in, let that mist pour through your body. Let it pour up into your head, to your arms, to your torso, to your legs. And when you breathe out now, breathe out all of the heaviness, all of the tightness, all of the guardedness, all of the disappointment, all of the pain, the loneliness. And then once again, fill in the in-breath with this very, very soft mist. Let it wash through you just as if it were cleaning through all the tubes. When it dislodges something, a sadness or a doubt or a fear, just breathe it out. Breathe deeply. And then once you feel you have loosened as much of the stuff that holds you back from knowing who you are as you can at this moment, then become like a director of energy and take in this very fine mist, fill your being with it, and then breathe it out and send it towards those beings with your thoughts. Send it towards those beings who suffer. Whether their suffering be physical, psychological, or spiritual. Just as if you were surrounding them with light. You were surrounding them with a loving space that said, do what you must do, but know that I am here with you. Use the power of your own thought and the openness of your heart to give life and love and space to all beings. And you can get so that every in-breath is a blessing you receive. Every out-breath is a blessing you transmit. Following your breath to quiet your mind, and breathing in and out of the heart to deepen your receiving of love and your compassion outward. You become an environment in which everybody you meet can grow. You become an environment of quietness of non-judgment, of love, of presence. For you to share the higher channels of consciousness, you must know them in your own being, not with your intellect, but with your being. To die consciously, you must live consciously. To live consciously, you must have the courage to go inside yourself, to find out who you really are, to understand that behind all of the masks of individual differences, you are a being of beauty, of love, of awareness. When Christ said the kingdom of heaven was within, he wasn't just putting you on. When Buddha said each person is the Buddha, he was saying the same thing. Till you can allow your own beauty, your own dignity, your own being, you cannot free another. So if I were giving people one instruction, I would say work on yourself. Have compassion for yourself. Allow yourself to be beautiful, and all the rest will follow.
This concludes Session 6. Our program continues with Session 7. Sounds True presents Experiments in Truth, Session 7, Living Spirit, Open Heart, Part 1 with Ram Dass, a talk recorded live at a retreat held in Yucca Valley, California in March of 1979.
Since the road that leads to perdition is wide and spacious, and many take it, but it is a narrow gate and a hard road that leads to life. It leads to life, and only a few find it. The pull of the world, the pull of desires, the pull of the solidity of the senses and the thinking mind, it's a wide gate. The pull of the spirit seems to be a narrow gate until you're on it, and then it becomes the only way. The power of the way, says the Tao, the power of the way, meaning the living spirit, will come into you when you are empty, like a valley or canyon, and therefore receptive to it. You will then be sensitive equally to good and bad as they concern you, and will be able to test everything for its worth. In the end, you will come to terms with the effortless worth that is located in the distant past. In the end, you will be like the valley which is the favorite resort of the way, becoming receptive, becoming soft, becoming open, becoming tuned, becoming quiet. And also from the Tao, the line, there are ways, but the way is uncharted. meaning there are methods, but the living spirit has no map. And all the methods to take you from here to there are based on what it looks like from the beginning of the journey to even conceive of a there. For the spirit cannot be conceived of. It just is. It just is. You and I have started a journey, maybe in this lifetime, maybe in past lifetimes. We've touched the relative nature of the physical universe. Once one touches it, the next question any Westerner asks is, what do I do about it? How do I have it for my own? And the answer, of course, is that you can't have it for your own. You can just become it. You can die into it, but you cannot control the living spirit. You have an experience of high, a moment later it is a memory. It's another moldering butterfly to add to your collection. So every time you grab an experience of a high and cling to it, you are just putting a thought form between you and the living spirit. Because any memory you've held on to of the high moment in your life is keeping you from this moment. And right here is the living spirit. If not here, then nowhere. This isn't preparation for later. You're not collecting this for somewhere else. This is what it's about, right this second. Everything you've been in all your incarnations, everything you've learned in life, what you ate for breakfast, all of it. Preparation for this moment here, right now. This is it. This is it. Until there is the spaciousness that says, yes, so. This is it. Ugly, beautiful, boring, confused, dead, angry, dark night of the soul, brilliant light spirit, just the way it is. And in just the way it is the spirit, not in the way you think it ought to be. So you grab at it, and you grab at experiences, and it's called spiritual materialism. And you get some powers because you see more than other people see, because you're a little quieter than other people are, and you see the relative nature of reality, so you don't get quite as stuck, and you get powers, and you've always felt inadequate and not good enough, so you love your powers, and you play with them, and you say, I'll do that for righteousness. I'll do it for the good of all people, but it's still you using your powers. And finally, you using powers takes you from the living spirit. And you'll find that. You can't be told that because you'll still want to play. But you will find as you play that moment when everybody's saying, oh, you're wonderful, do it to me. And you're busy, I will do it to you. You will feel how far you are. And then you will not be able to stand. See, once you have tasted of what it's like to be with the beloved, to be in the spirit, you can't stand it. You can't stand to be away. And finally, your own hypocrisy about any stance you take of being holy or being spiritual or being powerful or any place where you begin to be somebody is solidifying, it's calcifying, it's concretizing, it's taking you from the living spirit, and you can't afford it anymore. Just telling you how it is. You know, this is just the way things are. And so you kind of get a little discouraged and your faith flickers. Because you had the experience, you thought you knew, you took a stance to represent how you thought it was, and then suddenly it's all dead and horrible and ugly and empty. And your faith flickers and you say, I've lost it. And at times when the faith flickers and you're part of an organization or a belief system or a technique, that's when you become more fanatic. In order to reinforce your flickering faith, you try to convince everybody else that it's true. So when you feel that fanaticism in another human being, you almost know immediately that their faith is flickering. Because when the faith in what you're doing is perfect, when you just are what you are, you don't have to convince anybody of anything. Faith flickers, and it's often followed by what's called the dark night of the soul. I lost it. You have depression. And then you say, well, I'll just go back into the world because the whole thing was phony anyway. The whole spiritual trip was a hype. And all those people in the world that said there was nothing to it were right, because I've lost it and I'm not going to get screwed by not having anything. At least I'll have the world. So you go back into whatever part of the world you can grab onto again. And that's called, as Krishnadas once said to me, the phony unholy as opposed to the phony holy. Because the problem is that once it's happened, you can't forget it. You might try, you might sit at a bar and drink and lust and talk about soccer and fast cars and look for rushes and trips and more rushes and trips. But you won't be able to forget, because once you've awakened, you can't get back to sleep fully. You can do pretty well. You do pretty well, but you can't do it totally. You just can't do it totally. And at this time, because you have this heightened awareness and this ability to stand back a little bit from your whole trip, you begin to explore all of the things that you've held in before, and you explore relationships, and you explore sexuality, and you call it tantra, and you sort of see what you can get and what you can enjoy, and you come back much more into enjoying. You see, the problem was that a pendulum must swing, and when you first have the experience that awakens, then you read about the spiritual models, and you hear about them, and you buy them with your mind, because the Western intellect is so leading the heart that you tend to buy how you ought to be ahead of when you're there. So you buy that I ought to be, say, a renunciate. And a horny celibate is no closer to God than a person that is acknowledging. In fact, the person that's acknowledging their lust is, from my point of view, closer to God than a horny celibate. And so after the pendulum went to one side of appearing to be something, the phony holy, now it swings the other way, and there's the phony unholy. Because you pushed away your fascination with the world prematurely, and you're still fascinated. You still want to know what's happening. You're still looking outside in the world for something. You're looking for love, you're looking for relationship, you're looking for stimulation, you're looking for knowledge, you're looking for a titillation. And as long as you're looking for any of that, you're pulled into the world. As long as there's anything that your eyes can tell you, or your ears can tell you, or your nose, or your tongue, or your skin can tell you, or your thinking mind can know, you're still being pulled into the world. And there's no way you can make believe that you are not and get on with it. You've got to be the incarnation you are. And the more true you are about where you are, the faster the transformation happens. That's the karma of it. I'm just describing karma. I'm not talking about will. I'm talking about karma. I know lots of people who went through an awakening, joined groups, chanted, prayed, went to ashrams, and now they are scuba diving and having cars, fast cars, and just living very much in the world and looking for more and more trips and more sexual exploration with their extended marriages and so on. And I see them having to have a certain state of mind of a slight cynicism they have to hold on to be able to play that one out. But they have to play it out, and when they finish playing it out, they will be done. And you can feel that they've finished, but they don't want to give up. You try to milk it for one more rush, one more trip. Just I can get a little more out of it. It was good all those years. Why not once more? And when the trips start to fall away, if you're like me, you get really feeling angry and depressed and gypped. Because you look around and everybody, you see that ignorance is bliss. You see that everybody's getting fun out of bowling, and you don't want to bowl anymore. And you don't have anything else. It's the dark night of the soul, when you have lost the world and you're not yet tasting deeply enough of the Spirit. And it's a heavy period. There are a lot of heavy periods in this journey. And comes along with all this a kind of a deeper and a deeper understanding, a wisdom, a deeper wisdom. So you're understanding sort of how it all is and why this is all happening, and that yes, the trips will fall away, and it still hurts, because there are still the veils of attachment, of still wanting not to die into the Spirit. Because the awakening was merely the foreshadowing of the death into living Spirit. It's not the death. It's just the foreshadowing of the death. I'm just describing to you the stages of dying into Spirit. Because only when you are Spirit is there no death and no birth. And then you are. And you become who you truly are. And it's at this point, as you understand more and you see your predicament and you're acting out all your stuff, that your understanding of the way karma works makes it almost impossible for you to continue to act in ways which exploit others or which create karma for other human beings. And it starts to temper your behavior. The commandments start to be real for you, not as things you ought to follow, which is the way you've done it all your life. I ought to be good. As if you need to have these external controls to repress the internal stuff that is not acceptable to you. And finally, all of the precepts or the commandments or whatever they are become sort of obvious to you about that's the way life has to be, because that's the way it works. It's merely a statement of how it works. Because the more karma you create, the deeper you dig your hole of suffering. It's as simple as that. And there is a point where you really want to clean up your act. And you start to look for fire of purification. And that's when it gets very interesting, because you begin to think that lurking in you was a tremendous masochist. Because suddenly you are looking towards those situations that push you, that push your buttons, press your buttons. Instead of running away as everybody else does and as you've always done, you suddenly sit right with them. And you say, boy, is it hot. In the Ramayana, in the Valmiki version of the Ramayana, when Ram, God, has finally rescued Sita, his wife, from the bad guy, Ravana, and they are together, some people start to whisper it abroad that after all she lived with this bad guy for quite a while and she probably wasn't true to Ram. She probably made it with him, the bad guy. And she says she doesn't, but Ram is the perfect king at this point, and he realizes that if there is dissension among his people, that that's not being the perfect king, and that he's got to do something about this. And he's confused as to what to do, and Sita says to him, look, I have been totally pure in this, but if there's any doubt, build a huge fire, and I'll walk and stand in the middle of the fire. And if I've done anything wrong, I'll be burned, because impurity will get burned. And they build a fire, and she stands in the middle, and not even the tip of her sari gets burned, or of her dress. She just stands there, because gold is not affected by the fire, while all the impurities get burned away. So you begin to see that life's experiences will only be too hot for you if there is a you that's trying to protect yourself. The living spirit is not vulnerable to life's experiences. So when you are who you truly are, what fire is too hot? That's what Christ pointed out. He said, look, watch, I'll get nailed up. Far out, see, you think you're doing something to me? Call me names, laugh at me, psychological taunting. You can even kill me, go ahead. I'm not vulnerable. It isn't who I am. He was making a clear statement about what living spirit is about. And since you know the handwriting is in the wall of who you're going to become, finally the purification process just goes on and on, not in a heavy way, not in a righteous way, not in a righteous way, Not in I've got to do this to myself and getting tight about it. Not that way at all. A very humorous, delightful, playful, soft way. The minute you get ahead of yourself, you'll be righteous. So a lot of our job is slowing down enough to let our heart come into harmony with our minds, so we don't keep getting ahead of ourselves. We don't keep getting ahead of ourselves. So you clean up your work, and the cleaning up is what goes on until the very end. And sometimes you've got a lot of psychological stuff to clean up. And it gets weird because you're living in a world at that point where suffering is something to be avoided, and yet you are experiencing suffering as grace, and you begin to feel very strange. Because at that point, your suffering, or just the way life has been handed to you, is absolutely just the way it is. And no longer are you saying, it ought to be thus and so. You're just taking it as it comes. And at that point, your attitudes towards everything in life start to change. Your attitudes towards pain, towards death, towards abortion, towards the end of the world, towards all of it, just keeps changing and changing and changing. Because you're looking at it from an entirely different vantage point. You are now in the world, but no longer primarily of the world. The balance has shifted in terms of your consciousness moving from outside inside. At this point, some of your forms of livelihood change, because you look for ways to earn your living in a way to be dharmic. And sometimes you stay right in the same games, but the whole quality of the game changes. And you can be a lawyer, but it's a new kind of law. You can be everything, but it's a new kind of everything. I was at a meditation retreat, and we hadn't started the retreat yet. And we could talk just those few minutes before the retreat began. And I was in one of the bunks, and he was in another bunk in the same room. And I said to this fellow, "What do you do?" And he said, "I'm a vice president in a bank in San Francisco in charge of industrial loans." And he says, "But it's an interesting story." He said, "I was a vice president in a San Francisco bank in charge of industrial loans 10 years ago. And then I couldn't handle it anymore. And I dropped out, and I left my family, and I left the job, and I went off, and I took a lot of acid, and I wrote poetry, and I lived in communes. And I did that for about 8 years. And he said, then one day I was walking through San Francisco, and I met the president of the bank. And he said, gee, isn't it amazing that I've met you today? It turns out that your desk is open again, and you were the best vice president we've ever had. Would you consider coming back? And I thought, why not? So I shaved off my beard, and I got my tie and the whole thing, and got cleaned up, and I went to work. And I said, well, is it any different? He said, it's entirely different. He said, before, I used to be a vice president in charge of industrial loans. Now I'm a being that goes to this place, and I hang out with people all day long. And we're together, and the vehicle for us to be together is industrial loans. Right? So instead of hating the job because of his identification, he's now seeing it as a vehicle. And if you can think of a less appealing vehicle from the spiritual point of view, I would find it hard, because people come wanting something from you very material. And yet in every situation is the opportunity to meet living spirit if you are looking with those eyes that see. Because every human being in some way wants to live in the spirit. That's what the whole game is about. And whether they're buying a Cadillac or trying to get a bigger rush, the rushes, if you look at what the rushes are to take you out of yourself. Whether it's sex or motorcycling or scuba diving or cooking a bouillabaisse or whatever it is. It's always to get you to that place where you get out of yourself. I just got so busy crocheting, I just forgot myself. Same space. And you work with that fine line between testing God and trusting God. So it's just a very fine line there, where you're pushing the limits all the time to see how bad you can be without falling out of grace, versus getting to the point where you're just allowing it to be and trusting you're not going to lose it, and you don't have to test it. You just have to surrender and open to it. And it's at this point that you begin to appreciate what it means to start to have a very clean game. And you understand what Don Juan means when he talks about being an impeccable warrior, and how you have to clean up your act so you are clean dharmically on every plane of your game. And that's what we keep hearing. I keep hearing things, I've got to clean up. I've just got to clean up this and that. And it's all just a mopping up operation, really. It's just cleaning up the sloppiness in the game. And you get so that if you say you're going to be somewhere, you're there. Personality stops being that interesting to you anymore. Protecting your own power position. You know, and you begin to feel that if somebody else is playing a power trip on you, that's their problem. If you get caught, that's yours. So you begin to see that your job is to be impeccable without demanding that everybody else be impeccable. You don't have to say, I'll only be impeccable if you are.